Chapter 1. The 2 pink lines. The cheap plastic stick felt heavier than lead in Alara Vance's trembling hand. 2 pink lines. Not faint. Not ambiguous, but stark, bold, undeniable slashes against the white background. Pregnant. The word echoed in the cramped, echoing silence of her tiny bathroom, bouncing off the peeling paint and cracked mirror that reflected her own wide, terrified eyes. White blonde hair, usually tied back neatly for work, fell in loose strands around a face drained of color. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the lingering haze of disbelief. It wasn't just pregnant, it was pregnant with his child. Julian Devereux, the notoriously ruthless CEO of Devereux Inc., the man whose orbit she had accidentally crashed into for one unforgettable, anonymous night 6 weeks ago. A night fueled by cheap champagne at a charity gala she'd catered, a stolen moment on a moonlit balcony, and a connection so intense it had felt like destiny. Now, destiny had delivered a consequence she was utterly unprepared to face, especially concerning a man who likely didn't even remember her name, or the fake one she'd half-slurred. Desperate to maintain a flimsy shield of anonymity, a wave of nausea washed over her, acrid and sudden. It wasn't just morning sickness. This was pure gut-twisting fear. Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the closed lid of the toilet, the cool porcelain a stark contrast to the heat flushing her skin. Her breath came in ragged gasps. "No," she whispered, the sound swallowed by the drip, drip, drip of the leaky faucet into the stained sink. "No, this can't be happening." Her eyes darted around the tiny space, the mildew creeping up the shower curtain grout, the cracked floor tile partially hidden by a threadbare bath mat, the small grimy window overlooking a depressing brick wall. This cramped, struggling reality felt universes away from the glittering opulence of the Devereux Charity Gala. She could almost smell the cloying mix of expensive perfume and ambition, see the flash of diamonds, hear the murmur of powerful people making powerful deals. And him, Julian Devereux, standing out even in that crowd, radiating an aura of quiet command, his tailored suit fitting him like a second skin, his eyes dark, intelligent, intense, finding hers across the crowded room. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing the memory away, but it surged forward, vivid and unwelcome. Flashback, the gala night. Alara adjusted the strap of her catering tray, the weight of mini quiches and champagne flutes digging into her shoulder. She navigated the throng of designer gowns and bespoke suits, feeling like a ghost in her plain black uniform. Her instructions were clear. Circulate, serve, be invisible. Mingling was strictly forbidden. "Just get through tonight, Alara," she muttered under her breath. "Paycheck clears Friday. Rent is due Monday." She offered a flute to a woman dripping in emeralds, receiving a dismissive wave in return. Alara forced her professional smile to stay put, turning away just as a man in a crisp tuxedo backed directly into her. Champagne sloshed. A glass tumbled. "Oh!" Alara gasped, stumbling back as the glass hit the plush carpet with a dull thud, miraculously not shattering. Liquid splashed onto the gleaming leather shoe of the man standing beside Mr. Tuxedo. "Oh my God, I am so sorry, sir. Alara stammered, horrified, fumbling for the cocktail napkins tucked into her apron. Tuxedo glared, but the man whose shoes were now damp merely looked down, then up at Alara, a flicker of something unreadable in his dark eyes. It was Julian Devereux. She recognized him instantly from the society pages Maya sometimes thrust at her, laughing about the city's most eligible and terrifying bachelor. "It's quite all right." Devereux's voice was low, smooth, cutting through the surrounding chatter. He waved off her frantic dabbing attempts. "No real harm done, though I suspect this carpet has seen worse." Mr. Tuxedo huffed. "Still, Devereux, the staff should be more careful." Julian Devereux's gaze remained on Alara, a disconcerting intensity in his stare. He wasn't looking at her uniform. He was looking at her. "Accidents happen," he said, his tone making it clear the subject was closed for Mr. Tuxedo. He then addressed Alara directly. "Are you all right? You look a little shaken." His concern felt genuine, unexpected. It threw her off balance more than the collision. "I'm fine," she managed, trying to regain her composure. "Truly sorry about your shoe, Mr. Devereux." "Julian," he corrected quietly, "and forget the shoe." He paused, his eyes scanning her face. "You seemed out of place here." It wasn't an accusation, more an observation. She felt a blush creep up her neck. "I'm working, sir." "Julian," she corrected herself hastily, "just serving drinks." "I gathered that," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "But your eyes seem to be taking notes, observing the natives in their natural habitat." Caught off guard by his perception, She gave a small, involuntary smile. Something like that. It's quite the display. Of what? He pressed gently, leaning slightly closer, creating an odd bubble of intimacy amidst the crowd. Excess, she ventured, then immediately regretted her honesty. I mean, generosity. For the charity. He chuckled, a low appealing sound. Excess fuels the generosity, doesn't it? A necessary symbiosis. He gestured vaguely towards the glittering throng. It gets rather predictable inside. Stifling. I often find the air is better on the balcony. It wasn't quite an invitation, but the implication hung there. Elara knew she shouldn't. Protocol rules, the vast chasm between their worlds. But his focused attention was intoxicating after hours of being treated like furniture. And maybe it was the cheap champagne she'd snuck a sip of earlier, or the exhaustion, or just a moment of reckless curiosity. The air probably is better out there, she agreed softly. Minutes later, under the surprisingly cool kiss of the night air, they stood leaning against the marble balustrade, the city lights sprawling below like scattered jewels. The noise of the gala was a muted hum. So, Julian said, turning to face her, the moonlight catching the sharp planes of his face. What does the keen observer really think? She hesitated. I think. She started, then stopped. What was she doing? It doesn't matter what I think. Humor me, he insisted. His voice was different out here. Less CEO, more man. Still intense, but softer around the edges. Tell me something real. Everyone inside is reciting a script. She took a breath. Okay, I think it's beautiful and obscene all at once. I think people confuse wealth with worth. And I think, she looked out at the city, that most people chasing the lights forget what it's like to stand in the shadows. He was silent for a long moment, studying her profile. And you? Do you stand in the shadows? Sometimes, she admitted quietly, trying to find my own light, I guess. A different kind. What kind? Impulsively, she found herself talking. Not about catering or bills, but about her art, the graphic design portfolio she poured her soul into late at night. The dream of maybe someday having her own small studio. She expected dismissal, boredom. Instead, he listened. He asked questions, smart questions that showed he was actually hearing her. He didn't offer platitudes or false encouragement. He simply listened with that unnerving, focused intensity. And you? She asked, feeling bolder. What does the man who seems to have all the lights want? A shadow flickered across his face. Perspective, he said finally, and perhaps moments that aren't part of the script. He looked at her then, his gaze dropping to her lips. Like this one, she should have pulled back. She should have remembered her uniform, her job, the impossibility of it all. But she didn't. When he leaned in, she met him halfway. The kiss was electric, unexpected, erasing the city, the gala, everything but the startling connection between them. It deepened quickly, fueled by anonymity and a shared escape from their prescribed roles. Later, breathless, leaning against the cool marble, the understanding was unspoken but clear. This was, she started, trailing off. Just this, he finished, his voice slightly rough. No names, no strings. She'd given a fake name earlier. Anna, a spur-of-the-moment shield. He hadn't offered his last name on the balcony, only Julian. It felt safer that way. No regrets? He asked, his eyes searching hers in the dim light. None, she'd whispered, sealing the pact. A stolen hour, disconnected from reality. She'd slipped away before the encounter could unravel, leaving him on the balcony, melting back into the servants' passages, convinced she'd never see him again except in headlines. The memory faded, leaving the harsh reality of her bathroom even starker. No regrets, she echoed bitterly, clutching the pregnancy test. Right. A sharp pang of hunger, or perhaps just anxiety, twisted her stomach. She hauled herself up, unsteady on her feet, and splashed cold water on her face from the sputtering faucet. Her reflection stared back, wide, haunted eyes, pale lips. She looked fragile, vulnerable, words she hated applying to herself. She was Elara Vance, independent, resourceful, the one who always figured things out. Except this was a Category 5 hurricane hitting her meticulously, if precariously constructed life raft. She stumbled out of the bathroom and into her tiny studio apartment. It was one room, really, kitchenette crammed against one wall, bed folded up against another to make space for her drafting table and computer, art supplies, tubes of paint, sketch pads, pricey graphic design software manual she was still paying off, were stacked neatly but ubiquitously. It was her haven, chaotic but hers. Now it felt like a cage closing in. Tacked to the ancient refrigerator with a cheerful magnet shaped like a coffee bean was a stark white envelope. The corner peeked out, revealing the ominous red lettering. Final notice. Rent. Already 2 weeks late. Okay, she said aloud, needing to hear a voice, even her own. Okay, Alara, think. Options. Option 1, termination. Her stomach clenched violently. She sank onto the worn armchair, breathing deeply. She wasn't deeply religious, hadn't ever thought much about it, but the visceral no that screamed through her was undeniable. Maybe someday, she'd always thought a family, kids, but on her own terms, stable, ready. Not like this. Not terrified and alone, but the idea of ending it she couldn't. Not now. Not yet. Maybe never. Option 2, tell him. Julian Devereux. A shudder traced its way down her spine. Tell the cold, calculating billionaire, whose company devoured competitors like snacks, that their anonymous one-night encounter had resulted in this? She pictured his face, impassive, perhaps a flicker of annoyance. He could deny it. He could offer her money to take care of it and disappear. He could unleash an army of lawyers to prove her unstable, unfit, a gold digger. He could try to take the baby. The power imbalance wasn't just a gap. It was a chasm, a terrifying abyss she couldn't possibly cross. He probably didn't even remember her face, let alone Anna. Option 3, do it alone. Raise this child on her own. How? Her barista job at the Daily Grind barely covered groceries after rent. Freelance graphic design work was feast or famine, mostly famine lately. She pictured lugging a baby carrier into the coffee shop, trying to meet design deadlines with a crying infant. It was impossible. Utterly, terrifyingly impossible. She prided herself on her independence, on never asking for handouts, on forging her own path. This felt like failure, like being tethered to a life and a man she never chose. Her fingers trembled as she picked up her phone. Maya, her best friend, the one person who knew almost everything about her. She scrolled to the contact, thumb hovering over the call button. What would she even say? Hey Maya, guess what? I'm pregnant. Oh, and the father? Only the most powerful, unavailable man in the city who doesn't know I exist. She pressed call before she could second-guess it further. It rang twice. Alara. Hey. Finally calling me back. I was starting to think you fell into a vat of espresso. Maya's cheerful, rapid-fire voice filled the line. Listen, you will not believe what happened with that terrible client. The one who wanted the minimalist but also Baroque logo dash. Maya. Alara interrupted, her voice tight. The words caught in her throat. She couldn't do it. Not yet. The secret felt too raw, too terrifying to expose to the light. Even Maya's warm, supportive light. Did you finish that proposal for the bookstore? She deflected weakly. Yeah, ages ago. Sent it Friday, Maya said, her tone shifting slightly. You okay? You sound off, like really off. No. Fine, Alara said too quickly. Just tired. Really long shift yesterday. Listen, I gotta go. My landlord's probably going to call any minute about the... She trailed off, not wanting to mention the rent stuff. I'll call you later, okay? Alara, wait dash. But Alara had already hung up, dropping the phone onto the armchair cushion as if it had burned her. The isolation pressed in, heavy and suffocating. She was utterly alone with this monumental, life-altering secret, driven by a morbid curiosity, a need to see the fortress she was up against. She booted up her aging laptop. The fan whirred noisily. She typed Julian Devereux into the search bar. Headlines screamed dominance. Devereux Inc. announces hostile takeover. Julian Devereux named Titan of Industry, the Ice King of Commerce, inside Devereux's ruthless reign. Images flooded the screen. Julian in boardrooms looking formidable. Julian exiting sleek cars, expression unreadable behind sunglasses. Julian at galas like the one she'd attended, impeccably dressed, a cool distance in his eyes, occasionally flanked by a beautiful, interchangeable socialite who never seemed to last long in the public eye. No hint of warmth, no mention of family, close friends, or anything resembling a personal life beyond vague references to a demanding family legacy years ago. Steel and ice, Alara murmured, tracing his image on the screen. The man on the balcony had felt different, focused, yes, intense, but there had been a spark of something else. Curiosity, weariness, a shared moment of rebellion? Or had she just projected that onto him in the moonlight, wanting to believe the connection was real? The man on her laptop screen looked capable of crushing her life, like a minor inconvenience on his balance sheet. Fear coiled tighter in her gut. The next morning, pulling shots behind the counter at the daily grind felt surreal. The familiar routine, the hiss of the espresso machine, the clatter of cups, the smell of burnt sugar and coffee beans. Liam, her perpetually cheerful coworker, humming off-key, usually grounded her. Today it felt like she was moving through fog. Morning sunshine. Liam chirped, wiping down the counter. You look like you wrestled a bear and lost last night. Everything okay? Just tired, Liam, Elara mumbled, forcing a smile that felt brittle. Didn't sleep well. Rough night. He nodded sympathetically. Well, caffeine awaits. Order up. She was handing a latte to Mrs. Henderson, a sweet elderly regular, when a long, sleek black town car, impossibly glossy and out of place on their slightly grungy street, glided to a halt right outside the coffee shop's front window. Elara's heart didn't just leap. It slammed against her ribs with painful force. Tinted windows hid the occupants. His car. Could it be? Had he somehow found out already? How? Panic surged. She ducked instinctively, dropping below the counter, pretending to search for something on the lower shelf. Her breath hitched. Whoa! Liam whistled softly from beside the pastry case. Check out the wheels. Must be nice. Elara risked a peek over the counter edge. Her hands were shaking. The back door opened. A man in a sharp business suit emerged, checked his phone and strode purposefully past the coffee shop and into the law office next door. Not Julian. Not anyone she recognized. A wave of dizzying relief washed over her, so potent it left her weak-kneed and trembling. She leaned heavily against the counter, closing her eyes for a second. Elara? You okay? Liam asked, frowning now. Seriously, you look like you're about to faint. Sit down. I'll cover the front for 5. No, I'm fine, she insisted, straightening up, though her voice shook slightly. Just a bit lightheaded. Must be low blood sugar. But she knew it wasn't. It was fear. This constant, gnawing fear, this looking over her shoulder, this heart-stopping panic every time a fancy car appeared. This was her new reality. How could she keep working here, interacting with the public, if she was terrified he might walk in at any moment? That night, back in the suffocating silence of her apartment, the decision felt heavier than ever. Bills were spread across her small table, mocking her inability to cover them. The positive pregnancy test lay beside them, a stark pink accusation she couldn't bring herself to throw away. She sat hunched in her chair, the city lights casting long shadows across the room. Fear was still present, a cold knot in her stomach, but alongside it something else was stirring, a faint, hesitant flutter deep inside. Not physical, it was too early for that. This was emotional, protective, an instinct she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just her life tangled up in this mess anymore. It was this tiny nascent possibility. Her child. She had to do something. Running felt cowardly, impossible financially, and unfair to the child. Ignoring it, pretending it wasn't happening, was sticking her head in the sand while a tidal wave approached. Telling Julian Devereux, still felt like leaping into a shark tank armed with a leaky raft. Yet, the thought of this child growing up never knowing its father, or worse, having Julian discover the truth years down the line and unleashing the full force of his power and fury, it was paralyzing. What was the least worst option? Just as exhaustion began to blur the edges of her thoughts, threatening to pull her under into a troubled sleep, a sharp rap echoed through her thin apartment door. Knock, knock. Not the hesitant tap of Mrs. Gable from 3B asking to borrow sugar. Not the rhythmic beat of the pizza delivery guy she couldn't afford anyway. This was firm, insistent, official sounding. Elara froze. Her blood turned to ice water in her veins. Nobody ever came here unannounced, especially not this late, close to 10 p. She held her breath, listening. Knock. Louder this time. More demanding. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Who could it be? The landlord, finally coming about the rent in person? Police? No, that made no sense. Slowly, silently, Elara crept towards the door, her bare feet soundless on the worn linoleum. She peered through the scratched, cloudy peephole, a habit she rarely bothered with in her usually uneventful life. Standing in the dingy, flickering fluorescent light of the hallway wasn't Maya, wasn't the landlord, wasn't anyone she recognized. It was a man in a suit far too expensive, too impeccably tailored for this building. Mid-50s, graying temples, stern expression. He held a sleek, expensive-looking tablet, its screen dark. His expression was neutral, professional, but his eyes sharp and observant, scanned the empty hallway with an unnerving intensity, as if assessing potential threats. He raised his hand and knocked again, the sound jarring in the stillness. Then he spoke, his voice clear, precise, and cutting easily through the cheap wood of the door. A voice accustomed to being obeyed. "Miss Alara Vance? My name is Arthur Pendleton. I'm head of security for Mr. Julian Devereux." A beat of silence heavy with implication. "He requires a word with you, immediately."